across the world discussing how they are coping with the coronavirus pandemic. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Rob Burns of IOR World, based in Chicago but operating across the US. This is the first time we've spoken with one of our members in the States, so it's quite interesting to find out how things are from their perspective. Again, just bear in mind this interview was recorded on the 30th of March, and it's a very, very fast-moving situation, so some of the information you hear may be out of date by the time you hear it. Anyway, series of interviews with IOR members across the world. It's my great pleasure to introduce you today to Rob Burns, IOR World, based in Chicago. Rob's been a huge supporter of IOR over the years, and we really appreciate that. So thank you very much indeed. I wanted to show you your prototype for the bags for the Seville conference. I forgot to bring one back from the office, so I do apologize.
Well, we'll have to wait a few months for that.
Exactly. It's going to be a while. I'm fascinated to talk to you, Rob, because there's we haven't actually spoken to anyone yet about what's happening in the US. So what is happening? And first of all, can you just briefly give us an outline of how this is working? Is it a state-by-state unfolding set of restrictions, or is it federal?
Sure, exactly. It's actually all of the above. So, like a lot of other countries, we've seen a really big spike here in the last few weeks, and the numbers and response from the governments has been accelerating really, really quickly. So at the federal level, President Trump, Congress really set travel restrictions, guidelines for the country to follow. For example, last night, President Trump announced an extension of the social distancing guidelines through the end of April, which I don't think surprised anybody. But he had been really pushing to, reopen things earlier than that, and that was extended at least through the end of April. But as you noted, a lot of the states and even cities have their own policies and guidelines that they're following. So right now, I believe there are 40 states that have some form of shelter-in-place policies in effect. And Illinois, where IOR is based, is one of those. So our governor, a couple of weeks ago, had introduced shelter in place, which really means that you only go outside for essential things and that all non-essential businesses are closed. So banks, grocery stores, pharmacies, healthcare, all of that is open, but the rest of the retail world is pretty shut down. I was listening to Stephen Crine last week in Canada, and heard about the liquor stores in Canada, and apparently that's deemed to be an essential product, so those still are open in Illinois at least.
I'm relieved to hear that.
And so the states are imposing their own guidelines and policies, and then it goes down to the city level also. So in Chicago, where I live, our mayor about a week ago cut off all access to parks, the waterfront, any places where people were gathering in more than just a few people. The schools here are really on a school district by school district basis, but that falls to the local level. And schools in Chicago are closed through mid-April, but there's an expectation that will extend as well. So in the States, everything kind of started in Seattle was the biggest first area first really hard hit by this. And that's a big market for IOR. So we were hearing in early March that things were essentially just shutting down and had shut down there. And that was the first place we really heard of that type of action. Right now, it's shifted to New York, which has really become the epicenter, and the numbers, I believe, are over half the cases in the U.S. are in New York and really concentrated around New York City. So there are a lot of restrictions in place in New York and in the tri-state area, and those are only increasing in the last few days. So it is state by state, but almost everybody is following some guidelines to try to keep people at home.
And I mean, how has that been accepted? I mean, it was so interesting when this debate began in Europe about, obviously we all looked at China and how, the lockdown in Wuhan had been very successfully implemented.
Right.
We were all very concerned about whether people would do, we live in social democracies, whether people were going to follow the rules. How's that going down in the US?
fairly well. I'd say it was, in certain areas there were a bit of rocky starts with it. But I think with all the news, and I think everyone's very attuned to what the numbers are and what the situation is. So there certainly are exceptions, but I say overall, particularly with IOR, our friends, family, people we're talking to, everyone's taking this very seriously. And, you look outside and there are not a lot of cars on the street. There are not a lot of people out there. So I do think that there are always some exceptions, but for the most part, people understand the gravity of the situation.
Right. Good. Interesting to know. And just because we've got some restrictions in place, like that you can only have two people who are not in the same household together as a group. And you mentioned how the parks on the waterfront in Chicago had been closed because people were still gathering.
Right.
Is it likely that they're going to put restrictions like that in place?
Restrictions of more than two people?
Yeah, like tiny gatherings.
It's hard to know. Right now, most areas are saying restricting more than 8 people or more. I believe 8 people is kind of the number right now. Yeah. So hard to say which direction it's going to go, but I think for the near term, if everything's moving towards more restrictions for right now. So we'll see how that plays out. And
speaking of which, as we were discussing before we did the interview, we're going to follow up on this in a couple of weeks, and it'll be interesting to see, where we are then, and hopefully we'll be, further down the line in a good way. Tell me, Rob, how was it? I mean, you're a big organisation. How was the implementation of your continuity planning? I mean, that's quite an undertaking.
Sure. Well, the last couple of weeks have been incredibly stressful for business owners, for any business owner, for employees as well. But I'd say from a business continuity standpoint, that's really been the least of our concerns, at least from the technology end of things. So we have about 40 employees. Everyone has laptops. We have 24/7 access to tech support. We have a lot of security measures in place, like multi-factor authentication, some really aggressive phishing and spam filters. So it's really been pretty seamless. We also, as part of our business continuity, we do once a year, we'll do testing of the plan, where everyone works remotely. We work very closely with our IT partner to understand, was everyone able to get access to the systems? Was there downtime? What needs to be improved? So, unfortunately, we went through the IOR Global Quality Seal process at an amazing time, because we just wrapped this up, our recertification, in March.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so the timing could not have been better, from really reviewing risk management policies, business continuity. So, overall, that's been really the least of my concerns.
I'm really pleased to hear that. That's good. So tell me then, I mean, moving into greater concerns, what has been the impact on your... interestingly, I wanted to ask you this before we go on to talk about your teams. When I've been talking to people in Europe, I mean, the situation's fairly obvious. Most of our members are dealing with inbound work, and so therefore that stopped as soon as the airline stopped. What's been the impact on you, given that I'm guessing you do quite a lot of domestic and international work? Or
we do. So a majority of our DS business is inbound to the U.S., is international inbound to the U.S. And certainly a few weeks ago, when the travel restrictions started, that business started to slow down. So we went to all virtual support March 15th, I believe it was, and we're one of the first to do that. It actually was well received by our clients, because within a few days of that, everything had gone to virtual. Things were just moving so quickly. So that business has really slowed down. There were a number of programs still in place that we were able to finish up virtual, and we're still getting new authorizations, but for the most part, programs are on hold. Even the domestic business, since the shelter in place and the big focus on just not going outside unless it's something really essential, the domestic business has slowed down quite a bit as well.
Right.
And so right now we did a check of all the open programs we have, and most of them say in progress, but really to us that means on hold for now, because the business activity has ground to a halt.
So tell me, how has the impact of all this been on your teams? How are they doing?
Well, it's stressful. I mean, anytime there's uncertainty, it's a stressful situation, and this is just a whole another level. I mean, you hear it's unprecedented every day or multiple times a day. So, our team we have a great team, and they've been holding up, really well. We're doing a lot of things. We're obviously all working from home right now, but we're doing a lot of things to try to stay engaged, to try to keep the team together. So certainly a lot of video calls. We usually would have once a month team meetings. We've accelerated those to weekly team meetings. I do a lot of emails to the team, some videos. I do a Friday video to everyone. And really, communication is just so key right now, because it's easy to just feel isolated, particularly as things are slowing down and people are nervous. So we want to be candid with everyone. We want to be fair, and we really just need to keep the open communication lines going.
I think that's very profound, Rob, and thank you for saying that, because that's how I felt all the way along, just personally, that every time I'm communicating with somebody, it makes you feel less like you're in this by yourself and more like that there's a community behind us, within our industry, which is so important. And on that basis, how are you all staying positive? Are there things that, apart from communication, which is a great example?
Right. Well, communication really is key. There are a few small things we're doing to stay positive. Like one of the things at our team meeting last week, I had everyone say, tell me something that made you happy today. And started the meeting that way, and people were either talking or chatting it in, and it really, established a little bit of a lighter tone to start things when a lot of the meetings are dealing with stuff that's pretty serious and pretty heavy. So we were doing that. We're doing some virtual happy hours, some smaller virtual coffee breakouts. Mentioned a lot of video, more video than ever, and I think that's something that definitely will stick after this. I know before there was a lot of reluctance to turn on your camera when you were talking to someone, even if it's over Zoom or Skype, whatever it was. Right now the cameras are on all the time, and I think people just want to do what they can to feel connected.
I think that's absolutely right, and it's certainly something that we found within our own team, and just on the wider world, that just those small things that you don't get, that you still can have a chat around the water cooler. You still can talk about what's going on in your weekend, and like you say, what's made you happy today. I think that's great. Right. Tell me, has there been any indication on a federal or state level of any governmental, financial, fiscal stimulus or help, or how's that rolling out right now in the US?
Sure, that's a great question. And for the last 2 weeks, that's been a full-time job in and of itself, just trying to keep up with everything that's coming out of Washington here in our case. So just last week, Congress passed a major stimulus bill that was signed by the president on Saturday. And in terms of the main implications for business, or for our business in our industry, at least, I think, one is there's very aggressive push for lenders, for banks, to make capital available, to keep payrolls going, to keep rent payments. So the details of that are all still rolling out, but there are a number of different programs that the government is really pushing hard to open up the spigots and really ease the lending restrictions right now. So more details to follow on that, but there are a couple of different programs that are available to small businesses that should be very helpful. The other part of this, which I know is being done in some other countries as well, is that the unemployment benefits were increased by 150%. So right now, employees that are either laid off, which means separated from the payroll permanently, or furloughed, more of a temporary separation, those employees have access to unemployment benefits. And right now they've made it very, very attractive relative to the standard unemployment rates, so that when companies are evaluating options and trying to treat employees fairly, that's making it a little bit easier to have those discussions. There are also some acts that were passed a little over a week ago that deal with sick leave, paid sick leave, where the company would pay either all or a portion of leave, whether it's for dealing with if you have the virus, or caring for someone who has that, or even taking care of children who are home because schools are closed or daycares are closed, where at least a portion of the pay is reimbursed. So companies are paying that and then getting dollar for dollar reimbursement from the government, and that's actually going into effect on April 1st. So there's a lot going on. The government really is trying to do what they can to help not just small businesses, but all businesses, because really, I don't know any time there's really been such a pause button pushed on the economy, and no one knows how it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely unknown territory, and certainly from the point of view of what I was reading about President Trump talking about, I've read several articles about, saying you cannot let the cure be worse than the disease. That,
right.
there is this very fine political balance between letting life get back to normal and economies resume and protecting the population. And I have to say, I would not want to be in politics right now. Those are
right.
Awesome.
And there's no easy choices.
Right enough. Absolutely. Well, that's
much easier just to be a business owner right now.
Yeah, right. It's true, but it's very interesting to see how that's going to work out, because obviously, you've got a lot of people on your payroll. You've got loyalties, and the one thing that's just happened in the UK, which has made the most enormous difference, is the government will pay salaries.
Really?
So we can furlough people up to a certain limit, and the government will match 80% of the salary up to, I think, £30,000 a year. Yeah. So that means, because the point I was going to make was, when this ends, and it will end, the mobility industry is going to be so key in the rebuilding of our economies and our commerce. So you need to be in a position where you can, get your people back on the ground, I guess, right?
Right. And no one knows if this looks like a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. And certainly some of the travel restrictions, I think, will persist and will extend maybe a little further than some of as other restrictions are eased. The travel restrictions probably are going to be a little later to go. But I agree, and that's really a balance that business leaders have right now, is how to really just get through these next, hopefully just few months. Preserve liquidity, but treat your team fairly, and try to come out the back end with your team intact and ready to go. So we'll see how that all plays out, but it's going to be tricky.
It is. It's tough for. That's a massive understatement, but it's tough for all of us. It has to be said. I am so grateful for your insights, Rob, and it would be great if we can reconvene this conversation a few weeks down the line, because we'll all know more, and hopefully, like I said earlier, we'll know more in a positive way, and things we'll have moved on. But I'm so grateful. Like I say, everybody, this is going to go out. That I'm going to just date stamp it. It's Monday, the 30th of March. So things are moving very quickly, and obviously what we've discussed may well change. So keep an eye on the news.
No, it's things are changing by the day, and so when we catch up in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a whole new conversation, I think.
I'm so grateful to you, Robin. It's always lovely to speak to you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Take care. Take care. Stay safe and stay well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.